Greetings. This is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to take a look at the June 1925 issue of Weird Tales. The cover looks a lot more like what we've come to expect of Pulp magazine covers than what we've seen in the last few issues. This illustrates the cover story Monsters of the Pit by Paul S. Powers. Let's go into the magazine and take a look at it. First, of course, we have the table of contents. I noted last time that the page numbering followed a volume approach to things, so this continues with the first pages being in the 300s, but the magazine still has only slightly over 140 pages. 18 stories, including a few serials, as always. The cover story, Monsters in the Pit, is told by a man who has lost his left arm, and he will tell the story of how, while he was in Africa, he met this young woman and fell in love, asked to meet her father, who was one of the few Europeans there, and very much a misanthrope. Eventually he will, and the man will show him the results of his experiments. At first he shows him huge bacteria, they're several inches long, and then he will tell him that he also has insects and will bring him down in a dark room and push him down into a pit. Instead of hitting the bottom of the pit, he is caught by a huge spider's web. He can barely fight his way out, but the spider is coming for him. However, the girl, who is obviously also in love with him, will manage to rescue him. He will fight off the spider, not managing to kill it, but managing to drive it away long enough for them to both escape. However, his left hand was bitten by the spider. The corruption from it is spreading up his arm, and so the girl will, with the axe, chop off his arm. She will then manage to bring him to safety. He doesn't recall what happened because of the pain and the blood loss and everything. Of course, the house in which all these giant bacteria and insects is burnt down, presumably destroying all of these things. They make their way back to safety, get married, and that's their happily ever after. So this was quite the action-filled story. I quite enjoyed it. The story moves along at a decent pace. It suffers because it is the cover story in the sense that we assume that should the image actually be of the story, that there will be a giant spider at some point. But this is a problem even modern books and magazines suffer from occasionally. We can't begrudge the editors of Weird Tales that they use that image, which certainly would attract attention when on the newsstands in 1925. The next story is The Devil God by Frank Belknap Long, and this is set in some imaginary country modeled on Africa somewhere. The main character seems to be a witch doctor of some sort. He can call a doom upon people. He will be entreated by a man to call a doom upon the king. He will reluctantly do so. What he doesn't know is that just a day or two ago the king has been killed, and somehow he is now the king. The doom he calls upon the king, whom he does not name when he does so, will fall upon himself. I tend to like Long's writing. However, it wasn't clear to me why the witch doctor character should become king when the king is dead. It's not clearly laid out what his relationship to royalty is. A little bit disappointing, though I did like the fact that the person who can use magic is not enamored with it, feels that it is a burden and a responsibility rather than a privilege and a power. And also that that wasn't the point of the story. The idea of the supernatural or magical powers is slowly transitioning from being the shocking element in a story to being an element of the story, and let us try to tell a good story using this element. Next is Black Hill by Frank Owen. The eponymous Black Hill is a large mansion that enjoys a sinister reputation because of what happened. No one lives there for many years until somebody moves in from out of town. We then find out that the man who is renting tends to want to keep to himself, though he has a daughter. And of course, a young man will fall in love with her. He's a writer. He will pursue her, and eventually the man's secret will be revealed. It's that many years ago he stole some golden idol from some temple. He feels guilty about it, but he just can't quite get rid of it until something happens one night and the statue disappears. It turns out that it's the daughter who set things up so that it would appear somebody else stole this statue so that she could sell it, something she feels her dad wants to do but couldn't bring himself to do. I found this story rather disappointing. The whole history of the house has no bearing whatsoever on what happens. The young couple is rather sympathetic. The actions of the girl's father don't make much sense to me. This one left me a little bit disappointed. Next is The Third Thumbprint by Mortimer Levitan. In this one, a professor discovers a way to determine if someone is going to commit a criminal act and what kind of action this will be. So, whether they're going to be stealing something or killing someone. And this is all based on the person's fingerprints. He's very much a recluse, and he seems to be perpetually afraid that reporters will come into his house, disrupt his life and his research, and he will be contacted by one of his former students who will find out what he's done. It turns out the whole time the former student is actually a reporter, and he's done all this subterfuge pretending to be friendly in order to get the story. He asks the professor to prove his technique by providing 5 thumbprints and determining what the person will do. The professor will determine the various crimes that these people will be committing, and a third thumbprint he doesn't notice but is his own, and he determines that it's the thumbprint of a murderer. In anger at finding out that his former student is a reporter and lied to him, will kill him. I feel this story is trying to be clever, but not quite achieving it. The whole mind game between the professor and the journalist is a little bit too simplistic in a way. The characters just didn't work for me in this one. And it's followed by Marble by Laurence Dorsey. This story starts with a wife looking for her husband who disappeared. He's a jack of all trades, and the last anyone heard, he was going to this doctor's house to do some work, but no one's seen him since. She calls the police, who will investigate, but they will find nothing. The story then jumps several years later. The woman is still convinced that the doctor is still responsible for her husband disappearing. Slowly find out that he has a process that will turn someone into the marble, black marble to be exact. And of course, the police, when they investigated the disappearance of the husband, did not for a second think that a statue would be the husband in question. She manages to pull a sting on him, and the police see proof of what he did and arrest him. I like the idea of what the doctor's doing, this transforming people into marble statues. The story just didn't quite manage to grip me. I think this is an ongoing theme in this issue so far. And that's followed by The Clock by Arthur Styron. In this one, a man who very much dislikes monotony and routine and predictable things and likes variety and unpredictability is raging against the clock. And the clock belongs to his landlady, who is the exact opposite of him. She rises at the same time every day and goes to bed at night the same time. She has this clock that she likes a lot, and it's one of a pair. One of them doesn't work, and she says it stopped working the minute her husband passed away. She predicts that the second one will stop working when she passes away. Now, the main character, who hates routine, is very resentful of this clock. It drives him nuts. He will determine that if he kills the old lady, the clock will stop. As he goes to do this, he hears the clock and it just drives him over the edge, and he will smash it. And the conclusion is that Even though he never laid hands on her, the old woman passed away when he destroyed the clock. Another typical type ending where a strange coincidence is used to try to shock the reader. It is followed by The Soul That Waited by Louis B. Capron. This is told as a series of letters that a man sends from Egypt to a friend of his. He's fascinated by Egyptology, takes part in archaeological digs, and keeps trying to get this friend to join him. And he will find first a ring with a carved woman's face on it. He finds her quite beautiful, and then he will find a statue, and eventually he will find out her name, and he will fall in love with this Egyptian woman who lived thousands of years ago. He will pass away, but in his last will and testament, he asked to be buried in the traditional Egyptian way, being mummified, and it seems to be implied that this Egyptian princess has been waiting for her partner, who apparently is the writer of the letters. I like this one quite a bit. I've always enjoyed stories that are a series of letters or other written communications, and the story is inferred by these letters. Next, we have An Arc of Direction by Junius B. Smith, in which a person who disbelieves astrology is told by a friend of his who is a complete believer that if I have your date of birth and place of birth, I can predict the exact time and how you will die. And he actually predicts the incredulous person's death to the day. And of course, events turn out in such a way that the predicted death by hanging would have happened, except they managed to get to him just before he passes away. And I've never been one to believe in astrology. I find either you have this very deterministic story where whatever's predicted does happen exactly as predicted and nothing the characters do prevents it, or they manage to prevent it, in which case the logic doesn't work. I think the only time these stories can be interesting is in finding out how, in spite of someone trying to prevent whatever was predicted, it happens anyway, sometimes because of their efforts. Very few stories like that are actually very satisfying to my mind. And then we have part one of Hurled into the Infinite by J. Schlossel. This story is a bit disconnected. The first part concerns itself with a woman's disappearance, and her fiance goes on a search for her. So at first we think it's going to be a tale about a disappearing person and the search for her. Then, by complete and total coincidence, he finds some strange cult that has found a way to, using mental powers, to go to other planets. They decide to send one of their members and the girl that he kidnapped to some other planet. The hero interferes. We think at this point this is going to be him fighting this secret society. But no, his interference will cause both him and her to be transported to some alien planet. They get separated, and he explores the planet while looking for her. This first part ends with him finding her, but she seems to have been captured by a group of locals. What will happen next, we'll find out in the next issue. I found this disappointing. I find it doesn't quite know what kind of a story it wants to be. Rather than come up with some very improbable coincidence, perhaps just having a very quick one-page introduction. The girl disappears, he follows her, or maybe they both stumble upon this secret society and get sent. I don't know. People already knew how to start a story in the everyday and then move to the other planet. Edgar Rice Burroughs would do that in less than a chapter for a much longer tale. This one just doesn't take off, and it doesn't seem to know where it wants to go. It is then followed by The Witch of Kravetz by Michael V. Simko. In this one, a young architect goes to a small town to work on a building for a local aristocrat. He will encounter a young woman who is very beautiful, and he will fall in love with her. He will very quickly convince her to marry him, almost too quickly in some ways. Following this, he becomes more erratic and will be fired from the job. However, they've only just started the work, And then this is where my disbelief fell off. Apparently, in this place, they have this tradition that when you build a large building, in order for the building to be solid and last a long time, they will sacrifice a young woman, bury her underneath it. This architect will volunteer his new wife that he was so in love with. At the last minute, when it's too late, it's found out that even though everybody thinks she's really beautiful, um, most of her body is covered with splotches of color because she suffers from melanosis. This is the architect's way of taking his revenge, since the sacrifice should be as pure as possible, and she is flawed, quote unquote, in some way. And he feels he was betrayed by her because she hid his condition, since it didn't show up on her face or her hands. No one knew about it. I did not particularly like the story. I found the character to be very vain and unpleasant. The idea that a someone suffering from this kind of condition is a witch didn't work for me at all. So next is Lips of the Dead by W.J. Stamper, which I will mention. I'm not going to give a recap. Essentially, if this had been published 25, 30 years ago, it would have been right at home in the splatterpunk genre, which I was never really big on. It's problematic in other ways too. So we'll just go to the next one, which is The House, the Light, and the Man by Gordon Philip England. This is about a man who is terribly afraid of the dark. He accidentally got stuck in a store at night, trying to find his way out, ended up in a room that was filled with coffins, and he saw one of them open up on its own and a figure come out. That drove him crazy. And the figure in question was a thief who'd stolen some things in the store, had hidden in the coffin until nightfall, at which point he was going to make his exit when no one was around. The house in question is the madhouse. The light is the light at the madman's window, which he keeps on all the time because he never wants to be in the dark. And the man is, of course, the poor fellow who was driven mad. This tale did not super impress me. We'll move on to the next one, which is the last installment of Invaders from the Dark by Greye Spina. In the first part, the characters got set up. In the second one, we found out that the strange supernatural phenomena was a werewolf. Here we see what they tried to do in order to trap and get rid of this werewolf. As much as I like the first two parts, and there's still a lot that's quite solid here, there are two things that disappointed me a little bit. The first one is that we find out that the princess, who's a werewolf, her driver is in love with her, and she's been apparently stringing him along, telling him that one day, if he's a faithful servant, she would turn him into a werewolf too. Everything comes to a head when he realizes that instead of turning him, she will turn the main love interest of the female protagonist. In a fit of rage, he will kill her and himself. The tale ends with how it was difficult for the person narrating to actually write this, for strange forces were always at work to prevent it from being published. And then, of course, at the very beginning of the tale, there was a whole litany of reasons why it was so difficult to publish this story. And that's where the other part that I found disappointing is that there's no apparent connection between all these coincidences and a werewolf. That unfortunately weakened the story. Overall, though, it was still enjoyable and quite the page turner. It's followed by Loo Tun Sin by Everett Boston. I'm not even sure how to start narrating this one, so I think I will skip it and just leave it at that. It's followed by The Phantom Chibo by Arthur J. Burks, which I will again mention but not comment on. And then we have Dead Hands by Walter G. Detrick. This is about a young man who has a vision of his grandmother in a dream, though he dismisses it. And the next day, as he takes a walk to go see his fiancée, it's late afternoon or early evening, and what he doesn't notice is a wire from a high tension cable hanging down across his path, When he makes his way to the house of his fiancée, he gets angry because she seems to ignore him, and that's when he figures out that he's actually dead. The tale ends with her wondering where he is and starting to walk towards his house, finding him, and luckily for him, the doctors will manage to save his life. In the meantime, during the moments he was between life and death, he's glimpsed things that he knows this, but he's also forgetting what they are. I guess this was an okay tale. I've never been super enthusiastic about most of these ghost stories, and there's been quite a few of those in the pages of Weird Tales alone. It doesn't feel like this is breaking much new ground. This is followed by the next installment of Servants of Satan by Seabury Quinn. This continues the tales of the Salem witch hunts. George Burroughs was a previous pastor in this town. He was more focused on the kindness and love of God rather than his wrath, so they let him go. He moved to Maine, and yet somebody went to arrest him based on the accusations that were made against him. Seabury Quinn's opinion on what happened is showing here again. And I have to say, I kind of agree with it. It is worth it to look at what happened then because things like that are still happening today. And I guess it felt timely back then too, since groups of people were also being persecuted merely on the say so of others. That's followed by The Hanging of Aspara by Leavenworth Macnab. This is all about how a newspaper kept upping the ante on the story of a man who was condemned to hang in order to just sell more papers and doing things like having a cake shipped to him with a couple of saw blades in it. The journalist would show up less than an hour after the cake had arrived and say, "So is it true that somebody tried to send him saw blades in a cake?" And the sheriff thinks there's a leak in his department and yells out something in anger, and then the reporter will quote whatever it is he says. Any other number of things they did just in the name of selling more newspapers. Finally, we have the Eyrie, again, and treating people to write in letters to let them know which stories they appreciate the most, because this is your magazine, as they like to say. They also announced that they will start again publishing old classics of weird fiction. They also announced the first of the stories they have selected for these weird story reprints. It's going to be The Three Low Masses, a ghost tale by Alphonse Daudet. So I'm looking forward to this one. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the June 1925 issue of Weird Tales.